Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we drop new episodes every Tuesday.
So on today's episode, we're going to be tackling a big one. Everybody keeps talking about artificial intelligence. It obviously isn't going away anytime soon. And of course, one of the big questions is, can visual artists use it to enhance their creative process, right? But before we do that, let's actually take a moment to demystify what it is. I think there's a lot of confusion and maybe misconceptions about what AI really is. And some people think of it as like this autonomous robot, artificial brain situation that will replace humans and things like that. But it's not. The AI that we currently have that you keep hearing about, ChatGPT and all that stuff, all it is, it's essentially like a bundle of computer programs that operate on algorithms, patterns, data. They respond to inputs and provide outputs without possessing any kind of subjective experience or genuine understanding. And it makes it confusing because they can actually perform complex tasks and they seem to have intelligent behavior, but they actually have no consciousness or any kind of self-awareness or any ability to engage in independent subjective thought process. So for a lot of people, they're like, yeah, but I'm having this conversation with ChatGPT, for example. Like, I'm asking it to do this thing. I'm asking for suggestions. I'm asking for like actual input or feedback or things like that. And it can sound like a person, but it's definitely not. It's just a bit of technology. But yeah, anyways, it is not capable of autonomous thought. It's not the artificial brain you may have seen in movies with robots that think on their own. That's not what AI is. We're not there yet. Like, I don't know.
Keyword yet. Maybe one day, but I
Yeah,
think that
it could be
is
in a
an
lab
interesting part.
somewhere, but not now.
Maybe. I think that's the interesting part of the conversation too, because to your point, Adriana, it's definitely one of those like buzzwords of conversation. But specifically within the arts community, I honestly feel like it's a huge privilege to be an artist at this point in time to where technology is so readily available for us. And because there are definitely many industries, probably all industries are going to be impacted by AI. Some where AI may automate or definitely streamline certain individuals' jobs. But as artists and as creatives, I feel like AI is definitely just a tool that can help us rather than replace us as artists, because you can almost compare it to the introduction of the camera, right? Like it allows you to capture these amazing scenes that wouldn't otherwise be able to be captured to exact memory. But it doesn't work without the human being there to use the camera as a tool, right? It doesn't know compositionally how to set up the scene. It doesn't know, okay, what time of day would be the best to take this photograph. There's still skill and that creative mind behind the tool itself that is using the tool to create an even better output. And so that's kind of how I think about AI too, is using the tool with your creative edge, your experiences as a human to then connect with other humans, because that's ultimately what being an artist is, right? It's connecting with other people. And so AI really can be used to generate new ideas, to interact with that, I don't know, the balance between the real physical human world and then the technology. And especially as an artist, generating those ideas. So a few ways that you can do that would be, let's say if you want to create like a mood board for a painting series, maybe figuring out what is your distinct color palette, being able to upload all of the images of work that you've made up until this point and say, what would the top 6 colors in my previous work be? And then you can say, okay, what do those colors look like? And saying, is that my color palette as an artist? You use it as a tool of refinement to then influence the work that you make later. Especially in the more traditional sense, you can use it for things like artist statements, for resumes, being a proofreader for your statement of interest for an application can is a logistics way of really using the tool, and even exploring variations of a theme or a concept. Maybe I know as artists, we have those moments of there's so many ideas and creative ideas in our brain, both high level and the nitty gritty details. To where imagine having a document to where you can just kind of like brain download all of your thoughts, all of your ideas, sentences, quotes about your work, and then using AI to help you synthesize that into a cohesive artist statement. It's not pulling an artist statement out of nowhere. You're still putting your input into it, but it's a tool that's allowing you to synthesize that into a more presentable way to be consumed by other people. So definitely a huge tool.
Yeah. Other ways to use it includes you can ask different AI tools to do things like suggest books to read about specific art techniques or art movements. So you can ask it to help you finding resources that are essentially analog, right? They're on paper. But you can ask to help it point you in the right direction. You can use it to create concept sketches and reference images. I mean, I know there's artists that will use it to create artwork outright. And that is a whole nother conversation. And we'll dive into that a little bit more, where they're using it exactly as it comes out. And that's what they're trying to sell. That's a whole nother path. So we'll talk about some of those challenges coming up. But in general terms, you can use it for sketches and things like that. And just, again, to just generate some of those ideas. And then another one that I like it for, and I think a lot of artists, if they don't know about this, may potentially be missing out, is that it can help with doing things like generating schedules and doing administrative tasks that we'd rather be painting, we'd rather be sculpting, we'd rather be muraling, or whatever your creative discipline is. Not a lot of artists are into the admin side of things and would rather delegate some of it. So maybe you have to send out a client email, right? And you're like, just kind of dreading it. You could literally, like Jackie said, you could like dump some of those thoughts into a chat GPT window, for example, and say, I'm kind of thinking something like this, but I want to put it in a more formal way. And right now I'm at a lack of words. Like I'm just not in that wavelength, and just delegate some of that
Mhm.
administrative process. I mean, you're still going to have to refine it. You're still going to have to work through it, right? It's the output is only just going to be as good as some of what that input is, but it's a starting point, right? Now, there are challenges. There's no question about it, right? I mean, while it's full of exciting possibilities, there are some new things that have come with the introduction of AI, right? And it's questions a lot of it about where technology meets artistic expression, and then the legality of it comes into play, or the copyrights of it. When you think about it, AI is almost like the biggest collage system you can think of. Problem is, challenge, if you will, is that it takes millions, bazillions, who knows how many, of images and text inputs from innumerable online sources and essentially blends it all together to create an output based on your request. So this means from priceless art masterpieces to maybe the funny blog your aunt likes to write, they could all be part of the mix, but nobody opted in. So your image, my image, your art, my art, your cousin's art, everybody's stuff, as long as it made it online at some point, it could be something that the AI is pulling from, just like a Google search pulls from all over the internet. So does the AI, right? And it's trying to blend it all together. So it brings into question, like, if this is a collage of things, who does it actually belong to, right? Um, and is it okay that it may have used, maybe it was only for 0.0000001% of that image it generated, but it was still something that came out of something I did, right? So that brings it into question. And then there's also the ethical implication. So the AI algorithms, don't forget, folks, these are made by humans. And thus, these programs made by humans are also going to carry human biases, whether we like it or not. Now, without going too thick into the negative part of it, right? But to give you an example of how they could affect artistic expression, they're getting a lot better, right? There's a lot more conversation about it. There's a lot more open dialogue about it, and programmers are making changes to them. But to give you an example, earlier on, if you could type something like beautiful woman, the beauty standards that were biased into some of these systems, it didn't take into account that beauty standards are different across the globe. So at one point, all it was generating was Eurocentric models, right? Of a certain body type, of a certain skin tone, of a certain hair color. Like it was just like very narrow. And of course, the conversation started coming up like, well, I'm in this part of the world. That's not beautiful to us. To us, it's XYZ or this or that, right? So it's like, wait, it needs to be able to generate different things, right? And help to open up that conversation. But again, it's programming, it's still made by humans, but it does bring that into question. And then, of course, also part of that is tied in, at least in the US at the time of us recording this, you can't really copyright AI as it is exactly as it comes out, because as it stands right now, when if you were to try to do copyright, the government recognizes this is a collage of stuff, and if you can't point to who came from what or from where, it's really muddy right now. Doesn't mean it won't be resolved at some point, but as of right now, yeah, it's kind of muddy water. So trying to pass it off as I made this thing because it was my input, yeah, but the output is a combination of other stuff. So definitely some complications with it.
Yeah, and I think that definitely brings up a good point of some of those obviously huge benefits of AI, but also things to be kind of weary of, especially as artists being too overtly dependent on it. Like if maybe you get into a situation where then you feel like you can't paint unless you use AI to generate the sketch for you first, right? I would encourage artists if they ever feel like they're in that point or becoming too reliant on it from the art making side to maybe question that or ask, am I leaning into that as part of my creative concept? I think that's kind of a different conversation if that becomes part of your artist statement and part of the work and conversation that you're having. Because yes, to your point, Adriana, there are some legal, legitimate, whether copyright issues that you need to walk into because you also don't know where the AI is pulling images from in terms of their inspiration images if you're not telling it directly, only use references to these 10 images, for example. It's kind of pulling from the scope of the internet, all of technology, which means you may be using pieces of other people's work without even knowing it, which can be a very scary situation to be in. So keeping that at the top of mind, because ultimately, as artists, right, I think the big part of the conversation is making sure that we are preserving that human element in both the work that we make in our industry, and especially in this era of technology innovation. Preserving that human touch is super, super crucial. And as artists, I think that's where we are able to really leverage our power and our value in the work that we make by that human element, right? Because there are a few strategies to navigate those uncharted waters of AI, and maintaining the unique human experience. And I think the biggest thing for me that I think about is really just being intentional about infusing those human, genuine emotions into the AI work if you choose to use it as a tool. Learning how to write prompts that give the output that you want, including your personal experiences, your intention, your concept into the work, so that you're really steering the ship, right? This is just a tool that's being used. You're not blindly like following AI as create 10 paintings that will sell for $1 million and then replicate those paintings. That one, the industry doesn't exactly work like that. But also, I mean, as our podcast, we talk about a lot, like how do you define success as an artist? Making sure that you're not simply using it as a tool to quote unquote get ahead, but realizing how can this tool help you better become the artist that you want to be? Um, and making sure that you establish that personal connection between your audience, your collectors, your future collectors, and the work that you make using potentially tools of the algorithm.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also want to think of like ensuring that AI contributes, authentically to your artist's narrative without being overly dependent on it. a good example of this too is like, whenever I hear someone say, yeah, but again, we have to have on both hands, right? We're balancing the challenges of it and how it is derivative to a certain extent, right? In terms of how it pulls from all these different sources. But then on the other hand, if you look at the way that artists were traditionally trained, it's not that different in many ways, right? Like, Da
Mhm.
Vinci, how did he learn? He didn't like he had to learn from other masters and copy other people's work to learn. So in that sense, it's like it's not that different. Like nothing new under the sun, as they say. Like artists, like we learn in many ways by replicating other people's work anyways, since we start out the whole cube and the ball with a shadow. Like, come on. How many of you have done that at some point, right? Like that thing's been done for probably hundreds of years. So it's like there's portions of it that could be used at somewhat foundational level or kind of like at the base level, but then you don't just depend on it, right? Like you don't just, if you learn from Renaissance paintings, unless you want to specialize as a Renaissance painting type of artist, then you're going to get from it what you want and then you move on, right? Like you use from that what you need for your toolbox and then you move on. You don't have to just copy from it. So it's like super important that if your thing is, oh, I make anime type art and it's generating something a little more Renaissance like, that you don't just discard what you're passionate about to follow what the AI just put out to you, if that makes sense, right? Maybe you're just going to take elements of different things and kind of smush them together yourself. And then, with all this, always remember, of course, it's kind of like what we're trying to, share across too, is like, it doesn't work without you. It's just a tool, right? It can be a tool that can help inspire creativity, but it actually doesn't replace it. So it's just one of those things where it's like you want to, again, kind of like I get pre-AI, a lot of us maybe would have used Pinterest, right? And you would have put some images onto Pinterest and then being like, okay, I'm gonna save this one, pin this one. I like how the lighting is in this one. I like how the hands are in this other image. I like how the apple is in this other image. And you kind of like take all that and maybe condense it into something that you may not necessarily be able to take one photo of, right? You're just kind of like mentally doing a collage of these things. Think of it as AI like being able to help you be a little more efficient with those processes, but you're still the one that's coming up with, I want this hand post and this apple and this background and this lighting. Like that's still you. You're still the chef. You're just having an assistant mix some of the ingredients, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing that will really help, we'll be talking about a more systematic strategy for how to use AI. But real quick, a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist courses.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there. So, what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold, so you don't have to waste your time going down those endless rabbit holes.
In addition to weekly calls, we have created video course modules to cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, artist mindset, PDF resources, templates, and so much more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartists.com to learn more, get immediate access, and level up your career today.
Welcome back, everybody. So let's dive into, a systematic approach and considering whether this could work for you. So despite some of those AI specific challenges we discussed, there are definitely ways to navigate these new uncharted waters of, AI enhanced artwork that's out there, again, without sacrificing that human touch. So here's something to consider in terms of like steps, especially if you haven't tried it before and you're kind of curious, like, how could this work in your artistic practice? Here's some ideas. So, step one, of course, this doesn't change regardless, is you have to identify your objective, right? Whether it's you wanted to generate ideas for you or you wanted to create visuals, you wanted to compose a bit of music for something you're kind of, ideating or something else. that objective is the first step. That's, of course, the irreplaceable part. AI cannot do for you at all. Like that has to come from you. It can generate ideas, but figuring out in that decision making process of, okay, before I sit down and employ any of these AI tools, I'm trying to do X. That needs to be you. That's step one. The second part, of course, is going to be selecting the right AI tool. There's a whole bunch of them out there, and more pop up every day, of course, but they're all designed for different creative domains, different disciplines, right? Like some AI tools are more specific to writing, some AI tools are specific to copyright. There are some AI tools that are for animators or architects. Like there's all kinds of stuff out there, but obviously we're going to talk more about the ones for visual artists and are a little more popular out there. But for example, if you wanted to align the AI tool to your goal, and your goal is to do a text-based output, like, hey, I need help with my artist statement. My artist statement is 300 words long, and this application A wants it to be 200 words. Application B wants it to be no less than 320 words and no more than 400. I know you artists have seen these kind of applications. And this one doesn't want it to be more than 180 words. Literally, you can use something like Chat GPT to input and say, I want my statement condensed into these lengths or expanded into these lengths. And it'll give you a pretty good idea on what it could sound like. Of course, you'll still need to tweak it, but it takes a lot of the labor out of you and it's counting the words for you. Win-win, saving some time. And then if you're like, no, actually, I want image generation, I want to do a mock-up. I want to see what it would look like if I combine this flower and this building and a bicycle. I don't know, I'm making this up. Then there's other things like Midjourney, Dolly, Adobe Firefly are all very popular for image generation. And then another one that I found out when I was like researching for this episode is Juke Deck, apparently is a good one for music composition, right? Or one of the options out there. But yeah, it's also like if one of the like image ones, for example, is really good about, and some of them will specialize, and over time you'll see this. Some people will be like, if you want it really kind of like surreal, kind of like fantasy world, use X, right? If you want it very photorealistic, use this other one. Like you'll see over time, some of these tools based on your inputs, they're also almost like specializing. So you'll definitely want to line them up.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point too, in that obviously we are recording this episode in early 2024, but these tools are going to be ever evolving, right? Someone who's listening to this podcast episode a year from now, 2 years from now, may be like, oh, I remember that platform. We never even use that anymore. Or yeah, they ended up being kind of the one that like boiled to the top as the industry standard. I think that's the interesting part of still being kind of in the forefront of this technology, that kind of in comparison to the camera, I definitely personally see it as one of those things where at first it disrupts the market, and then years from now, people will be like, well, how did you not use it in your industry? Not saying it's compromising the industry, it's just fundamentally shifting it. Because especially when it comes to the world of being an artist, I feel like after you set your objective, you select which tool is right for you at the given time that you're using it. You could then also generate ideas from it. So let's say if you're a painter, experimenting with AI images to serve as reference photos for your painting. Maybe you have a specific pose of a model that you want, a specific light source on an object, a composition, certain geometric elements that you want to reference. Almost using it as a super dialed in Google search in a way of, this is the exact images that I'm looking for, and it can give you options, which is amazing. Then once you generate those images, step 4 would be integrating it into the work that you're making. So blending those visuals into ideas that you have in mind that maybe it couldn't quite capture. How does that translate into your oil painting, into your pencil drawing? And then step 5 would be continuing to refine it. Maybe after incorporating it into your work, you realize, oh, it's actually not quite right. Let me keep iterating what I'm asking AI to generate for me. Maybe there's specific preferences. I mean, especially when it comes to image generation, which we'll talk about in a minute about how we're each including AI in our creative processes. I'm still very new on the image generation portion, but I mean, you can specify, I want this composition and this lighting. I want the picture to be a photograph or painterly style. I want it to generate this mood for the audience. You can really get so specific with the inputs that you put into it, which really is the key for this tool. So continuing to refine, continuing to grow our personal vocabulary on what AI needs from us in order to give us the best output, I think is really where that key lies with merging your creative vision, AI as a tool to then creating artwork that connects humans to humans.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, and speaking of humans to humans, I mean, without your human touch, it doesn't work, right? Like it's just gonna look like another cookie cutter static image that could be a stock image on a Google search. That's not refined enough and it's just very generic. You know, it needs you, right, for it to look like you or be used for something that you want to use it for. So that's always going to be the most important element. You know, use it as a foundation, then infuse it with your style, your emotions, your personal narrative, you know, think of it more like a dance, not a takeover. You know, you can blend your human input and then this technology, right? That can help you with it. Much like, you know, a photographer, we keep using this example because I feel like it makes it a lot easier to kind of digest. It's like same thing with a camera. Like the way I would take a photo, the way Jackie would take a photo, the way you would take a photo are different. Even if it's exactly the same camera, we might even have the same training on how to use it. So it's not about the skill of using the tool, but our artistic input, our, you know, our experiences, our kind of like our creative lens is going to be different. So even if we're doing the same subject, same tool, it's going to come out different. So lean in on that. It's just another tool, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect transition into us talking real briefly before we wrap up today's episode about how both you and I are using AI right now. So currently, I am mainly using ChatGPT. I'm definitely still in the experimenting exploration phase if we are comparing it to the creative process. Definitely don't feel like I'm a seasoned pro at it by any means, but it is a really fun tool to explore and play with. I did recently upgrade to the paid version of ChatGPT after doing kind of a deep dive in research, especially through one podcast that I've been loving, which is called Everyday AI. They kind of compare it to the free version of ChatGPT that I was using for a couple of months. It's kind of like the basic cell phone, right? Like it can make calls, you can communicate with other people, but on a very basic level. And then the paid version, which at this point is $20 a month, which definitely is an expense, but nothing too outrageous for many people, would be the paid version, kind of comparing to a smartphone. So you can call, but you can also text and you can email and you can download apps and you can integrate it with other platforms. And so the thing with the paid version is that you can actually have 3 outside plugins in each of your chats, which is kind of getting in the weeds of the logistics. So we don't have to do too much of a deep dive, but you kind of think of it as those apps on your smartphone. So not only can you call people, but you can share an Instagram link, which is pictures and captions and links. And so currently, the plugins that I'm exploring are one called Zapier. So ChatGPT is great in terms that it creates content, but it can't really automate your processes too much. It says, hey, this is the written output that I want, and then it can produce it based off of its library of information, right? But Zapier, it really is good at automating processes, but it can't really create content. So when you have one that creates content but doesn't automate, and one that automates but it doesn't create content, you pair them together, and in theory, the perfect pair. So that's what I'm exploring right now. In addition to a couple of different web browser plugins. And plugins, just like apps on a smartphone, is an extensive library, hundreds and hundreds, especially as AI gets more popular. So there's a huge range based on what you want it to do. So I'm exploring a couple of the different web browser plugins to where you can say, hey, here is my artist's website, read content based off of it, and produce an updated artist statement based on my previous exhibition history. So it can pull information off your website without you having to like redundantly put it back into the system. And it's updated in real time. So that's what I'm really excited for. And the other one being Canva. So Canva is a free platform that many artists use, whether you're creating like graphics for your newsletter, or if you want to like overlay text or overlay your logo onto an image, it's a great way to do it. And so you can kind of include it into your chat. So you have some written content, some image content. And yeah, I'm kind of exploring how those things can all work together. There's a hundreds, if not thousands, of combinations of plugins that you can use. But I would say the biggest thing that I've learned and am excited to continue incorporating in my business is really treating Chat GBT like an employee, to where you have to provide it the content, you have to provide it the training, and you're really just delegating tasks to them. And it's really only as good as the content you put in and the tools that you provide, right? As we talked about this whole episode, it's not going to replace you as an artist, but if anything, can be used to then give you more time to make artwork. So I'm excited to continue exploring it. I know this ChatGPT is just one of many AI tools, and maybe we'll have to do a follow-up episode in the future to see how some of these explorations and experiments, which ones stick, which ones were left at that, and how it impacts our business a few weeks or months or years from now. But Adriana, which tools are you using right now and what for?
So also using ChatGPT. I like to use it with things like sentence structuring, like maybe I'm writing out the main paragraph for a newsletter, and then I just kind of get stuck on like, should I use this word or this word? Does this sound a little more concise than this one? Does it sound too artsy fartsy? You can like take that back down a little bit, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or to catch typos. I think it's really good for that. Mainly like helping with things that are written, right? Generating documents, like if there's a section of a contract that I'm trying to find, I can feed it the contract and be like, I know there's a section in this contract about XYZ. I'm not necessarily having it generate the contract, but if it's like a 16-page contract and there's a clause you're trying to find, if it's in there or not, I love giving it to it and be like, can you find it? Where is it? And it'll be like, oh, it's in section 16.3 of this giant contract, is the thing you're looking for. So I
Yeah.
like it for
Or
things like that.
translating contract speak to be like, what are my rights based off this contract? Or
Yeah.
like, what
Well, and it's
questions
not
should
a
I be
legal
asking?
advisor. Yeah, and it's not a
Right.
legal advisor, and it's not a replacement for it, so it's not going to help you with that. But it can give you an approximation essentially, which can
Yes,
be really helpful. Give you the bones of something that then you can take, say, to a legal person to be like, can you verify this for me?
for sure.
As it relates to contracts, of course. And then it can help me generate ideas for social media captions or even like videos or things that I want to create. A lot of times it's not that I can't come up with the idea, of course I can, but then I'll just be like, which one do I even pick? Or I need it a little more flushed out. Like, let's say I want to make a video on a specific topic for a reel that I want to record. Well, I may just want some ideas on what things I'm going to record for it, what clips or some things I want to say. Again, it's still dependent on what my input is, but it's super helpful to generate some of those ideas. So that's chat. Same as you, Jackie. Like, I also like to treat it. I'm actually nice to mine. I've heard some people are mean to it. I'm like, I'm a nice boss. I'm like, can you please, do this? Thank you so much, or whatever. I thank it. Not that it's a person, it's not. But it is a tool made with a lot of humans, right, involved in its creation. So I'm like, it actually is kind of like, I don't know, it's cool. I think it's cool. Um, so I'll use it for that. And then when it comes to image generation, I've mostly been using Dolly and Adobe Firefly. I find it super helpful for things like mural mock-ups. So if you have a client that's like, I want this plant, this dog, this bird, this thing, da 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 da, you can literally like put it all in because mentally I'm like, I can't even visualize. Like that's too much stuff. Like how would it even look together in one image? Like sometimes that's like a headache, right? Like in terms of like that's too many elements. If it's based on one thing or two or three, that's one thing. But if it's a lot of things at once, um it can be hard too for clients sometimes to visualize. They're like, I know the things I want, I just don't know the way they would look. And then it can be as a tool that then you can use with them, a tool of collaboration to say, hey, if you add those 15 elements, it's going to look really crowded. Here's an example. But you didn't just spend hours and hours drafting this, by hand or on an iPad or painted or whatever your, creative discipline is, just to be able to show them that that idea needs refinement and it doesn't work the way it is. You can literally use it to be like, plan A, all 15 elements. Plan B, here's what just the 5 most important. Plan C, somewhere in the middle, right? And you can literally use it to generate, rough concepts like that, saving you a ton of time and saving them a ton of time too, helping them visualize. So I think for murals especially, super, super helpful. It can also help organize some of the compositional elements of like different things that you're trying to create. If I'm like, I want a painting or I want design that I want to turn into a screen print, for example, and I need it to be just 6 colors. Maybe my original had like 15 different colors, but they all seem similar-ish. But in a screen printing process, it's a screen per color. It's not going to print everything. You have to like consider what layer goes where. So for things like that, it literally can help you pare it down. And again, save you a lot of times. And then sometimes honestly, I'll use it for fun, right? I'll just be like, oh, there's this cute coffee shop I just went to, and I wonder what would happen if I were to propose a design. And then I'll just like come up with like some impossible thing, right? Like some fantasy world with dragons sipping coffee. I don't know, I'm making this up, right? Just to see what it comes with. And a lot of times it's actually really fun. But those are some of the main ones. I'm always definitely looking for some of the new ones that are out there. I'm not paying yet for any of them. Well, technically I do pay for Firefly because it's part of my Adobe subscription that I do pay for a lot of money. We're not going to talk about that. Adobe, if you're listening, thanks, help me out. But essentially, like a lot of them, you can trial them for free. A lot of them are being built into different web browsers, and at least you can experiment with them. But yeah, that always on the lookout. Like Jackie said, we might have to do a follow-up episode at some point with what some of the new ones are. But for now, what we'll say as we wrap this up is, from the invention of cameras to personal computers and now AI, of course, there's always a question of how these different technologies can disrupt or enhance um, not just our artistic careers and our processes and how they impact them, but also like people's perception on art, right? Like, why would I pay an artist to do this if I can just have a computer do it? Because the computer's not necessarily going to do a good job depending on what input you gave it, right? Let's just kind of boil it down to that. But what we would say is like, definitely encourage you to explore those various AI tools, especially since there's so many free trials and things you can do out there. So you can see for yourself and decide if this is a worthy addition to your creative toolbox. And again, this AI is it's not a robot brain, it's not an artificial brain. It's just another tool. It's like Jackie said, it's like an enhanced Google search, if you will. It's like the smartphone. It's like a nicer camera, like it's just like a nicer tool. It doesn't have to be like this looming scary thing. Challenging, yes. Useful, also yes. So that we're gonna go ahead and wrap up today's episode. And yeah, we hope you got a lot out of this one.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes where you can find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
Yeah, and if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at MA Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio across all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we're at Level Up Artists on Instagram.
You can also visit levelupartist.com to get immediate access to templates, resources, and course modules to level up your creative career today.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.